Drummer, composer and band leader Mauricio Zottarelli has been part of Filtron M since the very beginning. He appeared on the albums Mandatory Underground and Astoria Roots Live and can be heard on the first single of the new Filtron M album of the same title, Transit Net. In this conversation we talked about how he has adapted during the current crisis so far, his drumming style, his Brazilian roots and some of his work and influences. A lot of adaptation to the new situation going on with all these changes. Can you talk a little bit like what's been going on the last couple of weeks, months, how you adapted?
Sure. It's crazy. I felt like deep inside we all kind of had that hope that, in 4 or 5 months we're going to be back to normal. I started seeing less and less people saying the expression back to normal. That's an interesting kind of turning point towards maybe May or June. So I think there's a general sense that we're kind of closing a cycle and we're going into something new now, be it a more online presence, be it more streaming concerts and recordings at home, whatever it's going to be. But I feel like we're definitely going into a different area that we weren't really in before. I have a little studio here at home where I basically compose music and do production and things like that, but I can't play drums in the house and I don't have access to the equipment here. So during this whole time, I haven't been able to play drums. So whenever the studios open up a little bit, I figured, I'll go and I'll spend a day and I'll do a few songs. And so I had a list of things that I wanted to do when I had the opportunity to play again. And one of the projects was this song by Gary Husband that he made available through a series of videos that he has. So people can download the lessons that he teaches, how to play a particular song. And then you get the song to play along as well. So I coordinated with him to do this version and he was very pleased and it was cool to be in touch. He's one of my heroes, obviously, for drums and keyboards.
Yeah, he's incredible.
There's another project that I wanted to mention. I was in the studio in last October or November last year and I had a couple of hours to kill. And I did maybe about 40 minutes of improvised drums. I just played, had a few different tempos in mind. So I just did a bunch of, improvisations like that. So that kept me going throughout the whole quarantine because I had all these material that I could post. So it became an exercise on composition for me. I wanted to write music based on these different drum solos that I played. I had that series already happening, but during the quarantine, I got very active with it. And it's a series called Drum Inventions. So it's basically drum solos, but I write music, several months after. So I don't remember what I played. And I end up having a pretty established framework of what the song is. From March until beginning of August, mid-August, all I had was, practice pads at home and, just minimum technique work just to keep up. But one of the benefits of staying home for this long, I started watching all these webcasts and composers and people sharing ideas and back and forth. And if you have questions, get in touch. So all of a sudden I'm talking to, people that I look up to in the business. Because then, after a few months with no work and nothing going on, it's hard for people to find motivation to practice. Living in New York, most of my practice becomes getting ready for the next gig. Just getting ready for whatever work is coming up. So now, we have this time and no work. So I figured maybe I should do a live Instagram video or something that I could motivate myself to. I know I have at a certain day, certain time, I have to practice whatever exercise. And then I just figured I would do this live so people can ask questions and we can share tips and information. And it's been really fun. So I do it 3 times a week and people join in and they ask questions. I usually show them what I'm doing. I show a little score and that takes off into other areas of drumming or music. I also wrote some new things for my group. Whenever that happens, who knows? But
okay.
So I'm working on a new album, as we speak, but it's a process.
I wanted to talk to you a little bit about your drumming style combined with Brazilian music and Brazilian influences. So if you could maybe talk about that.
I started pretty much by myself in a way. I was doing percussion when I was a little kid, had, drums or certain things, or I would go in the kitchen and steal pans and play on the couch. And I was like that for a few years until I started getting some access to percussion instruments in my town. And my dad used to play keyboard, so I played a little bit with him. He's a big jazz fan, but like the swing era of jazz. I kind of grew up listening to that on top of all the Brazilian music that we normally hear, right. Carnival stuff and a lot of rock. You know, in the 80s, there was a big rock, Brazilian rock movement in Brazil too. So I grew up with a lot of 80s rock, sang in Portuguese, done in Brazil, which had a flavor to it I can't quite describe. But it's influenced by American and British rock, but different. You know, I was more of a heavy metal rock drummer that then I became, you know, more of a fusion guy once I discovered Chick Corea and the Electric Band and Return to Forever, Mahavishnu, all these things. But when I came to Berkeley, I was more into fusion and jazz a little bit, not so much Brazilian music. It was strange because people would expect me to play Brazilian music the way that they, you know, that you would expect a guy that knows what they're doing in that style. And I knew the grooves, but I wasn't really versed into the nuances of playing samba or playing baião. Or I developed it here, which is not an uncommon story. I found out over the years that once people go away, they kind of miss the culture, then they immerse themselves back. For me, it was, you know, it was an expectation that people had, and then I became curious with it. I started playing with a few Brazilian musicians in Boston, and then I kind of got into Dom Salvador, who is a fantastic musician, one of the pillars of Brazilian jazz and Brazilian funk too. Legend.
Who you then ended up playing with a lot. I mean,
No, it's crazy. Dom Salvador, he's very good friends with my dad, because he's from the same town. I kept hearing his name, but he has a nickname for the close friends. And so I never put it together that it was him until I finally met him when I was here in New York. By that point, I had already listened to his records, and then he has Edison Machado playing on Rio 65 Trio, which is a classic. So I researched a lot of Edison Machado, Milton Banana, Tom Romão, Ayrton Moreira. It was interesting when I came to New York, people started calling me because of the Brazilian background. It was new to me in a sense, the whole thing of playing. And then I started playing with Cidinho Teixeira and Dom Salvador, you know, playing with you and a lot of Brazilian gigs in the city. It was great. You know, I had that chance to develop what I was hearing.
You played with a Cape Verdean artist.
Carmen Souza.
Did she point out certain feel things that were different, that are particular in Cape Verdean music, which are different from Brazilian?
There was a lot of that. It's usually Carmen and Theo Pascal. Theo is the musical director and the bass player. And they would both point me, you have to do this. This is the main, whatever, grooves or rhythms that are necessary in order for everything else to happen. Yeah. But their approach is very jazzy in a way too, at least the repertoire that we were working on those tours. There was some opening points where we could improvise using maybe the background that I have in world music and Brazilian music, but they had a specific instrumentation that I needed to use. So I didn't really have toms. I had bongos on top. You know, I would play with certain sticks to give a flavor of a multi-percussion set rather than a drum set. So I had to learn about textures and voices too for certain styles. They embraced whatever influences I brought from the Brazilian background or the jazz background too. So it really became a hybrid of a lot of different things.
I think it's always the best situation when you have a setting where the musicians involved are open enough to let everybody be themselves. And trust.
Absolutely.
Trust the background you already bring to the table.
There's different levels, right, Manu, of creativity in that sense too. We can play what's needed, but then we can get creative with sounds. You know, sometimes you identify a musician because of a certain texture or a certain sound that he or she uses rather than the notes. But that's one of the things I love playing with you and with Filtron M. It sounds like Filtron M, but everybody sounds like themselves in the project.
That's the goal, right?
And you explore so much of everybody's strengths. You have a structure of how it's supposed to sound and textures and all that stuff and build-ups and vibe. It sounds like your baby in a sense, but you know how sometimes you see other people play and it's hard to identify. There was so much stuff that was written and then it becomes very, very structured. I think Filtron M has both in a great balance. So it's very, very fun.
Thank you for saying that. I'm grateful to have such great musicians that I get to play with and get to explore the music that I write.